It was a crisp morning at Andrews Air Force Base. Flags snapped sharply in the wind as thousands gathered beneath a pale sunrise. Families wrapped in coats, veterans standing tall, cadets and active duty service members aligned in perfect rows. The air buzzed with anticipation as President Donald Trump prepared to speak at a ceremony honoring military service. Among the crowd stood Airman First Class Caleb Monroe, just 24 years old. His uniform was immaculate, every crease sharp, every ribbon perfectly placed. Still, his eyes betrayed him, darting nervously toward the stage, then down to the object clenched in his hand. A letter, crumpled, creased, worn thin at the edges. His mother had driven all night from Ohio to watch him stand among a group of honored airmen. She was somewhere in the crowd, smiling proudly, but Caleb barely noticed. His focus wasn't on the ceremony or the applause building as President Trump approached the podium. It was on the promise. Trump waved to the crowd, nodded to the senior officers beside him, and began, "I'm here today to thank the brave men and women of the United States military. You are the reason this country stands tall and proud." Applause thundered across the base. Caleb swallowed hard. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had never liked attention, never wanted it. But this moment wasn't about him. It was about truth, about honor, about someone who should have been standing here beside him. His grip tightened around the letter. Behind him, an older veteran leaned in slightly. "You all right, son?" Caleb nodded, though his mind raced. He knew if he didn't act now, he never would. He looked back at the massive screen, at the president mid-speech. The words he had rehearsed in his head for years finally surfaced, clear and steady. He wasn't just another airman in formation. He was here for someone who never got the chance to be. And what he was about to do would change everything. 3 years earlier, Caleb Monroe had been just another kid from rural Ohio. Money was tight. His father had died when he was 9, and his mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Through it all, Caleb had one constant, his best friend, Derek Sandyval. Derek's father had served in the Air Force, and his stories fueled their dreams. The 2 boys talked endlessly about enlisting together. "I'm going to be a pilot," Derek would say with a grin. "You'll be the serious one," Caleb would reply. "I'll salute you from the ground." They laughed every time. During their senior year, they made a pact. No matter what happened, they would enlist together. And they did, but fate had other plans. 6 months into basic training, Derek collapsed during a morning run. He had been hiding symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, chest pain, afraid that speaking up would end his dream. Doctors diagnosed an aggressive heart condition. He was gone within days. Caleb was shattered at Derek's funeral. He knelt beside the casket and whispered a promise he hadn't told anyone else. "I'll serve for both of us. And someday, I'll make sure the world knows who you were." Now that day had come. As the president continued speaking, Caleb stepped forward, heart pounding. His voice cut through the ceremony. "Mr. President." A hush fell instantly. Heads turned. Security agents reached for their radios. Caleb raised both hands, the letter visible. "I'm sorry," he said, steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I just need 1 minute." Agents began moving toward him. Then President Trump raised his hand. "Wait." The entire base fell silent. Trump looked directly at the young airman. "You have something to say, son?" "Yes, sir." "Come up here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Caleb's legs carried him forward before doubt could catch up. He climbed the steps as the president handed him the microphone. "Go ahead." Caleb turned to face the sea of uniforms, families, and flags. "My name is Airman First Class Caleb Monroe," he began. "I wasn't supposed to be standing here alone." He took a breath. "I enlisted with my best friend, Derek Sandyval. We trained together. We dreamed together. But he died before he ever got the chance to serve." He held up the letter. "He wrote this during training. It was never mailed. It's addressed to you, sir. May I read it?" The president nodded. Caleb unfolded the fragile paper. "Dear Mr. President," he read, his voice cracking, "if this ever reaches you, it means something amazing happened. Maybe I became someone worth listening to." The wind seemed to still. "My name is Derek Sandyval. I'm just a kid from Ohio, and I've just begun Air Force training. I don't know if I'll make it. It's hard, but I wanted to say this." Caleb steadied himself. "Serving this country isn't about medals or recognition. It's about hope. I come from a town where kids stop dreaming by 16. But when I put on this uniform, I felt like I was part of something bigger." He glanced up, emotion thick in his throat. "I don't want to be remembered as brave or strong. I want to be remembered as grateful. Grateful for the chance to wear this flag. Grateful to serve alongside my best friend, Caleb. If I don't make it, I hope he does. I hope he serves for both of us. And I hope one day someone hears my story, not because it's special, but because there are thousands like it." Caleb folded the letter. "I promised I'd carry his memory," he said quietly. "Today I kept that promise." President Trump stood still for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, took the letter gently, folded it, and placed it inside his jacket. "Thank you, Airman Monroe," he said. "That's something the nation needed to hear." He turned back to the microphone. "Today was meant to honor our military," he said, scanning the crowd. But it became something more. A reminder that service isn't just about victory. It's about promises kept, brotherhood, and the heart of America. Then he turned back and saluted Caleb. The crowd erupted, not for politics, not for spectacle, but for Derek and for the airman who carried his memory forward. That night, long after the cameras stopped rolling, Caleb lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed endlessly, but one message stopped him cold. "You don't know me. I served with Derek's dad. What you did today brought him back to life for a moment. Thank you." Caleb finally let the tears fall. Back in Ohio, Mrs. Sandyval sat motionless in her recliner, replaying the moment again and again, her son's words echoing through a nation at last. And somewhere between grief and grace, a promise made at a casket had finally been fulfilled. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the longest echoes. And this one had just begun. Mrs. Sandyval clutched a framed photo of her son in one hand and a crumpled tissue in the other. Her shoulders trembled as she stared at the television, tears blurring the screen. "He really did it," she whispered. Caleb really kept his promise. Derek's father, once a proud, stoic airman himself, had passed away 2 years after their son. Grief had hollowed out the house they once shared, leaving silence where laughter used to live. But that afternoon, as Caleb's voice echoed to the living room, something shifted. The house felt warmer. Mrs. Sandyval reached for the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. When Caleb's mother answered, neither woman spoke at first. Then, through tears, Mrs. Sandyval said softly, "Your boy, he gave me my son back today, just for a moment." They cried together. In a town where grief had long dimmed the light behind every window, Caleb's act sparked something new. Hope, not just for the Sandivals, but for every parent who ever wondered if their child's story would be remembered. Back in Washington, President Trump returned to the White House and quietly removed Derek's letter from his jacket pocket. He read it once, then again. He sat at his desk, opened a drawer reserved only for deeply personal items, and placed a letter inside. That evening, in a private meeting with his closest staff, he spoke plainly. "We're doing something special for that airman," he said. "Not for politics. For Derek." Heads nodded. Plans were set in motion for a national tribute, one meant to honor stories like Derek's. For once, the machinery of government wasn't responding to polls or headlines. It was responding to a single letter from a young man with a dream and a friend who refused to let it die. A week later, Caleb received a formal envelope bearing the presidential seal. His hands shook as he opened it. "Dear Airman Monroe, you've reminded this nation what it truly means to serve. I would be honored if you would join me at the White House to present Derek's letter to the country. Please bring your mother, and, if she is willing, Derek's mother as well. Donald J. Trump." Caleb's heart raced. When he showed his mother, she broke down in tears. When he called Mrs. Sandyval, there was a long silence on the line. Then she whispered, "Yes, he would have loved that." Dressed in full uniform, Caleb stood in the Oval Office beside the 2 women who had raised him and his brother in spirit. President Trump greeted them warmly, shaking each hand with quiet respect. "This isn't politics today," he said. "This is personal." He turned to Mrs. Sandyval. "Ma'am, thank you for raising a young man like Derek. His words change how I see service." She nodded, clutching her son's photo tightly. Trump opened a presentation box and handed Caleb a folded American flag. "This flew over the White House yesterday. I want you to have it." Then he paused and added something no one expected. "We're naming a new Air Force Leadership Scholarship after Derek Sandyval." Caleb gasped. Mrs. Sandoval's knees buckled, and Caleb caught her just in time. "The Sandyval Honor Scholarship," the president continued, "for young people who embody sacrifice, leadership, and loyalty." The room fell silent, broken only by Mrs. Sandoval's quiet sobs. Caleb stood taller than he ever had before. 1 month later, a national ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. Veterans, generals, and Gold Star families gathered beneath solemn skies. A special tribute honored Derek Sandyval. Caleb stood beside Mrs. Sandyval and spoke once more. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm just a kid who kept a promise. The real hero was my best friend, someone who never got to wear the uniform outside of training, but lived like a soldier every day." He held up a copy of the letter. "This letter now rests in the Library of Congress, but its true value isn't in history books. It's in every young person who chooses to serve something bigger than themselves." The crowd rose. Then, one by one, veterans across the cemetery raised their hands in salute. The impact spread farther than anyone imagined. Recruitment centers reported a surge of interest. Schools launched Letters to the Future programs. In a Texas high school, a student read Derek's letter aloud during morning announcements. The quietest the building had ever been. Talk shows covered the story not for drama, but for its honesty. And when President Trump spoke Derek's name during a joint session of Congress, even his critics stood and applauded. This wasn't about party. It was about principle. Weeks later, Caleb returned to Ohio. Before going home, he stopped at Derek's grave. He knelt in uniform and placed a small wooden box at the headstone. Inside were a replica of the White House flag, a photo from the Oval Office, and a letter of his own. "Dear Derek, you made it, brother. The world knows your name. I'm still trying to understand it, but you always believed this would happen. Thank you for teaching me what real service means. I'll carry your story for the rest of my life. Your brother, always, Caleb." He stayed there for hours. When he finally left, the grave was no longer just a marker. It was a monument to a promise kept. Months later, Caleb reluctantly appeared on a national talk show. The host smiled. "The Airman who silenced a nation." Caleb laughed softly. "I wasn't trying to silence anyone. I just wanted someone to hear Derek." If Derek were here now, the host asked, "What would you say to him?" "I'd say you mattered," Caleb replied without hesitation. "You still matter, and your dream didn't die. It's flying higher than ever." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Years passed. Caleb completed his service, mentored new recruits, and eventually settled into a quiet life in Colorado. Every year, on the anniversary of Derek's passing, he received a card from the Sandyval family. "You kept his promise. We'll never forget." At the Air Force Academy, Derek's photo now hangs beneath a plaque titled, "The Letter That Echoed." One day, Caleb stood before a group of new cadets. He held a worn piece of paper. "This letter," he said, "was written by someone who never got to serve, but still changed the world." He handed out copies. "Never underestimate your voice. One voice, spoken with love and truth, can change a nation." The cadets stood. One by one they saluted, and the promise lived on.